for today, and it is called Who and What Are These Poems For? And thank you for joining us. We've got a larger post-COVID panel here. We have Jack Sheedy, poet from Harwinton. All right, we have Pat McCullough from Cheshire, president of Connecticut Poetry Society. Woo! Antoinette Rubel, Connecticut State Poet Laureate. Woo! Barb Janis, our Poet Laureate from Ridgefield, Connecticut. Woo! And Katie Schneider, who is a poet from Norwalk.
Yes.
And host with Chris Belden of Foompa Live.
And a monthly open mic in South Norwalk at Eco Evolution. You all should tune into the stream on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Woo! Sunday night. And please come down to South Norwalk to the open mic. It is so much fun.
It's an honor to have you guys on this panel and to be in a room with all these wonderful people too. Having hosted podcasts, people in their poems, as well as Woodbury Writes, and talking to a lot of writers, the question of audience always comes up. And as a teacher, we're always telling our kids, be mindful of your audience, which I think is a quiet way of saying don't use any bad language in there. And it's interesting to me that the people I've spoken to, the writers I've spoken to, have always identified a key person who validated them and celebrated their first works as writers. And so writers' audiences are very important, and yet some writers say I don't think about an audience when I write. So my first question is, must there be an audience we hold in our minds when we write, or can we trust the poet to find the poem, to find its audience? And does anybody want to jump in first?
I'll take a shot.
Okay, Jack.
I'm a natural born show off anyway, so I like an audience, I need an audience. But not every poet needs that or wants that. Emily Dickinson, we're going to mention her throughout the day. She wrote, 1,800 poems, and she published 7 or 10 in her lifetime, and I think she wanted most of them destroyed, right? Or she wanted her notebooks, her correspondence to be destroyed. But I guess her sister found the poems and got them published, and the rest is history. So, I mean, did she want to be a poet for an audience or just for herself? That's probably for her to decide. But me, I like an audience, and I respond to an audience. And I wrote one quick, short, light verse for an audience, and it's very short, and I'll just share it with you right here. It's called Leprechaun's Lament. The tip of my nose was as red as a rose, so I went to the dermatologist. He said, close your eyes, sir, and I'll cauterize her, and that rose will fade, and that's no jest. He tricked me with Novocaine just to postpone the pain, and even though I couldn't see him, he must have used chisels. A blowtorch that sizzles. I smelled like a crematorium. When things became clearer, I glanced in the mirror and almost collapsed from the shock. My cheeks had exploded. My nose had eroded. Better faces I've seen on the clock. Oh, sometimes do I wish that I wasn't Irish, with skin that brings nothing but misery, where everything nasal erupts and sells basil, and I bake in the sun's own rotisserie. You can't do a poem like that without thinking about an audience. But then there are some more personal poems that I've written that I probably will never share with anybody because they're just too personal, and I would want my executor to destroy them when I die. So I guess it depends on the poet and the poem.
I'll take that too, because as a poet laureate in my town, a lot of the poems I write are custom poems for events or occasional poems. And in those situations, you're very aware of who your audience is, and you're speaking in language and in images that your audience will understand. Most of my poems, though, are much more of a personal nature, where I am my audience. I am writing to please myself, not necessarily please myself, but to express myself, definitely. And it's almost irregardless Is that a word?
Regardless. Yes.
Regardless, thank you, of whether anyone ever sees them or not. So I'm with Jack. I mean, it's really, yes and no is an answer for that one. Irregardless.
Oh, go ahead. Are you sure, Pat? Okay. For me, I think when we're saying like who and what are these poems for, that's such an essential question, and I'm always into like finding out about the why. Why do I even have the urge to write this? Why is this important? And I kind of always tried to search that out. In my MFA program, I did some research, and I was really interested in poetry as prayer. And so that was an answer that I kind of found for myself. And I'm like, okay, you know, and I know that spirituality means a lot to me, but not to everyone. But what is it about like the urge of prayer that is something that is kind of so essential and just very human, whether it's part of a religion or a spiritual practice or not? And I did some deep dives, and I found this great definition of prayer that I think just matches the urge of poetry. It's speaking out from what is within you, and then having faith in the value of that utterance, even if only you are the audience. Like believing in the value of finding the words, putting it into words, and that in itself being kind of a sign of life. Like if you're still, thanks, Susan. Like if you are able to do that, even just for yourself, like it's kind of like you're gonna be okay. And then, you know, having that faith element that it's of value, that it's of value at least to you,
Right.
that it in itself is healing and cathartic just in capturing it, then, you know, maybe there's also this greater faith that this will be of value for other people to hear. And so I feel like, as someone who does come out of a pretty serious religious background, but has really evolved in a different way from that, I take that with me in a more holistic sense these days. Like, when I encourage myself to write, like I'm encouraging myself to be honest, to find the words, to have that freedom from linearity that you need with other forms of, with other genres of writing typically, and that's a good for me, and that's something that I often will then want to share. And that becomes something that I encourage other people to do. Like, oh, you know, I don't know how to write poetry. I'll hear my friends say this. I don't know how to write it. I can't write this kind of poetry. You know, what if it never gets published? In terms of the what is it for, I think it's first always for yourself. If it's for an occasion, of course, it's an occasional poem. But I think the end goal can be to have someone read it on a page in a quiet moment, for it to be inside a literary journal or a book. But it certainly can also be for something like a live stream or an open mic, or for a special occasion where you're really sharing something with other people, for a memorial. I think you know, poetry is for us, and it is a beautiful sign of life among us. So whether you consider yourself a poet or not, like you're doing it, and it is something important. And I think that any venue where you're able to share that is a really valuable and worthy one, whether or not that's like in a book, which is still something very wonderful.
Brava!
Thank you, thank you.
That's a really good question, and I can answer it just from my personal standpoint. I write for myself. I think a lot of poets write for themselves because they feel something, they want to say something. Of course, there are those who just like to get published and just write for publications, but I think it's really important to write for yourself because it helps me make sense of the world. I write about people. I'm a people poet, and almost every poem I write is about a person. And I think that when I give a reading, the audience is important because I read to a specific audience, but if I write what I feel, I will always have poems for each and every audience, if that makes any sense. So I think, you know, if you write for yourself, those will be your best poems. Thank you.
I would say that I don't hold an audience in mind when I write. Basically, I come to the page as an act of truth-seeking. You know, what is this about? What am I going to make of this? Sometimes I go to the page for healing. You know, if something is happening outside of me, I'm beginning to think of Trayvon. When that happened, I was so, I guess, traumatized is the word. And I only felt a little bit of relief when I wrote what I call the Walmart poem. And it talks about Trayvon, it talks about, you know, having a son, and it talks about how easy it is to get a gun, and all of those things. And when that came just spilling out of me, it was almost a rant on the page, and that's exactly what it looks like on the page, just one big block of print. So that I could just get it out. So sometimes for healing, sometimes to understand, sometimes to become a part of a larger conversation that's happening around me. One thing I learned early on when I was writing a poem I might have been afraid of. Sometimes we are afraid of what we write, and we're afraid to put it out there in the world because we're afraid of what people will say about us, or what they will think of us. So when I sit down, I tell myself, no one will see this.
Perfect.
This is just between us, you know, just you and the page, Antoinette. And then by the time I've researched and poured over it and everything, by the time I'm finished with it, I'm ready to let it go. You know, and so I send it off. My expectation is that it will find its audience, or its audience will find it. And when I do a reading, I will, you know, have my poems mapped out and timed. But sometimes you walk into a room and you can just feel that other poems are necessary for that. And so then, you know, those sticky notes get changed around really, really quickly, and you feel like the second set of poems is more in conversation with the audience, or what has already been floating in the air. So I don't worry, I think, about audience. But one of the things I will say too, because it's been brought up a lot, is about poetry as a part of the historical record. And I always say that poetry undergirds the historical record. I'm so grateful for the historians who are just recording and disseminating the facts. You know, just the facts, the numbers, what happened, all of that, because we need that. But the arts bring in the humanity.
That's right.
Right? So they give those numbers meaning and context. And so I always say that we need both the historical record, and then we need the arts to better explain what was going on at that time.
Absolutely. Here's here.
Add on a little bit to what Antoinette said, and yeah, historical is definitely a key thing. But I want to reflect back on writing for yourself, or writing personal poems. It's not like you're just talking to yourself. You're processing, you're healing, as Antoinette mentioned. And then when it goes out to the world, you find very frequently, like I wrote a book about my daughter's addiction, my own addiction, my mother's depression. And when you read from it, or if you hear from people who have read it, it's not personal anymore, it's universal, and you're helping other people process it.
Always.
I have another collection I just wrote as my eldest sister, was terminally ill and eventually passed. And it's the same thing where I didn't have any place else to process this enormous loss. And I've heard from, it just was accepted for publication too, and I wrote to the publisher that she said, I was with at every moment of the, so you're helping other people too.
Yes.
So it's not a selfish personal poem.
No.
It's a giving and very universal personal poem. So I just wanted to.
Yeah.
Interesting, which relates back to the idea of believing in the integrity of the lived experience.
The value of expressing it, you know, even if that's just for yourself, that I don't think that's ever a selfish thing. I think it's something necessary, and it's like this sign of life. It's a sign that even if things have been very hard, like you're putting it into words, you're crystallizing it, you're saying, you know, this is worthy, you know, my time is worth it, the effort is worth it, and then if I share it and that can, you know, help resonate with other people and help them heal, help them see something, help them remember something, that's a, you know, even more incredible value. It's always worth it. I don't think it can ever be selfish, like when you're thinking of it like that.
You know, it's interesting, yesterday I did a workshop with Bard and Peter Elbow, the scholar, the linguist, the guy who taught us to free write, 88 years old. He answered all these very highfalutin academic questions from the people who were there. And then he said, words are mystical.
Yeah.
And all the
Yeah.
stuff was coming out of the ears, whatever we had.
Oh, no.
But I thought, golly, he said it. And that's how my whole life was made. Words are mystical. And
So good.
yeah, and at 88, he validated everything that we just said.
Awesome.
So I just want to, and we're kind of heading in that direction. We write to honor the experience, but what is the role of an audience for us once we find that audience? How do we engage our audience, and what is the value of that interaction for you as a poet?
Oh, I'm ready with an answer.
Okay.
I'm ready.
Good, Katie.
You know, I think I've mentioned this today before, and you can see it a lot in my chat book as well, that I have kind of come out of and into my own spirituality from being very evangelical for many years. And I'm finding so much these days that that community, you know, separate from religion, doesn't need to be a part of it, we don't have to hate it either, but that community itself, good community, like, is my church. Like, good community is my gospel, right? So if I'm thinking of poetry as prayer and this inherently valuable thing that is kind of this beautiful sign of life that's keeping you alive, a sign of expression, a sign of honesty, a sign of like, it's worth it for me to share what's within me and connect with other people, then I think, you know, it's a beautiful thing to have an audience that is hearing that, right? That's being encouraged by it, and then that's saying, you know what, I can do that too. And to have the people themselves encouraging each other, yes, you know, grab onto that mystical urge, grab onto that like healing urge, grab onto that urge to express and to capture and to like enjoy life and to meditate on life, and keep living, express that, you know, pour that out of yourself in, you know, in creative expression, whatever that may be, especially poetry, and please share it. And so I think that's something that undergirds what I do with the live stream and also the open mic. Do you have something to share? Yes, please share it. You don't have to be a professional. You don't have to have published a book, although we love that and we give you lots of time on the stream if you have. But we want to encourage everybody to be a part of it, whether they consider themselves a professional or not, because we want to support that community. And through that, you know, we've had so many people say, this was exactly what I needed tonight. When they come to the open mic, this was such a friendly place. Like, I found people who were like kind to me and wanted to hear me, and I felt so good about this. And, you know, whatever their age was, whatever their talent was that they had to share. And I was like, you know, when I went to all these churches back in the day, you know, I had certain beliefs at the time that led me there, but what I was really craving was that kind of loving, accepting community, and you don't need to subscribe to any one set of beliefs to find that if you're able to find such a precious thing. So I think audience in that sense is really wonderful and important.
Thank you.
I think that, you know, when you're speaking to an audience, you're really talking about humanity and bringing people together, because you, through your poems, whether they're personal or not, you create an understanding, and you let people realize that we're all the same. We're not that different from one another, and you know, what I feel is what you feel too, and what you feel too. And I even find that with my students, when they workshop their poems, you know, at first they're terrified to share their work, but then they grow so much because they realize that, hey, I'm not the only one
That's right.
with this problem. I'm not alone. I'm not different. You know, and I think that's a beautiful thing about the audience and having them react and appreciate what you wrote.
Can I jump in? I had a couple of English teachers, literature teachers, who had tours of advice for poets and readers. And it's the same two words, only connect. It's the responsibility of both the poet or the prose writer or any kind of artist to connect with the audience. And it's the audience's responsibility to find a way to understand what is being said or presented to them. So it's a connection that has to take place. If that doesn't happen, then art does not exist, I don't think. I mean, I think art is created through that connection. Going back to the first question, I think the only time that you should not share a work of art is if it serves no purpose. If it will harm somebody's reputation, if it will embarrass someone, with no other, balancing effect, counterbalancing effect. Don't do it. I think that those poems, those works of art should be burned or just, not shared.
Sort of poetry that doesn't go beyond catharsis.
The catharsis, yeah.
I guess I'll go ahead and jump in. I've been thinking a lot about audience since I was appointed poet laureate. I think I have given more thought to audience, in this last 10 months than I probably have, in a 20-something year career. When I think of my audience, I think of connection in terms of us being able to share in that space while I'm reading, because that is a give and take.
That's right.
Even though I may be the one reading, I can feel the audience, and that becomes a conversation that we have
Right.
almost energetically. I know when I need to find a poem that's
Brings it up.
that's a little bit lighter. I know if I'm in a space where this particular line of poetry is really working and people are being touched by it, I can feel that.
That's it.
So I think a lot about that connection. I also think that as a poet whose work is being read, it's on me to start conversation. And so I will say that I totally agree with you that if your work is didactic or if you're being unkind, that shuts down conversation, right? But to express a particular point of view, I've become very comfortable with the fact that as I am writing, and I'm looking for answers, that I may find more questions, and that's fine. And it's great to have those questions in the air because the audience might have answers for me. But anything that begins a dialogue where everyone feels like they're included, or they can, participate, I think that is also the responsibility of a poet. But then I think too, it's okay to challenge the reader
Yes.
and then to challenge yourself. Because you were talking about coming from an evangelical community. For many years, I too was in an evangelical community, and I don't think that would surprise anyone who's read my work, that, there are a lot of biblical images and imagery and that type of thing. But when it came time to write my third book, These Women You Gave Me, which is a look at what happened in the Garden of Eden between Adam, Eve, and Adam's first wife, Lilith, and some people would go, what, first wife? It was scary for me to write this for a lot of reasons. One, I was very comfortable with the Christian stories, because, being a part of an evangelical movement, I was very familiar with the Bible. But then I had to do tons and tons of research on Jewish Midrash. And I was really, I wanted to do it right and make sure that what I was writing from, I was not misunderstanding or misinterpreting. I had to talk to a rabbi about this.
Awesome.
And then what I ended up doing is telling the story through a female perspective. I personified the Garden of Eden. She becomes a woman, then I have Lilith in her own voice and Eve in her own voice. It was scary for me.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to do everything, respectfully, but then I also wanted to challenge the conversation of what happens when women tell women's sides of the story. And so this was something that was terrifying for me, but that I did put out into the world as an opportunity for conversation.
Awesome.
For us to look at how we see ourselves and how we see each other, and how these foundational scriptures and stories impact us even now. Right? And so I've had some fabulous conversations around this book, and that is what I offer the audience, a contribution to an ongoing conversation. So when I go to the page, I don't think about audience, because I don't want to pander to anyone. I just want to find the truth and answer my own questions. But when I lift my head up and it's time to share the work, I'm hoping that there will be exchange and conversation.
Absolutely.
I think with me, my relationship with an audience, which, as you say, you don't really know about until post writing, is the idea that I want them to be challenged by the work. I want them to say, wow, she said that out loud. And because a lot of things have to come out of the closet. A lot of things the stigma needs to be removed from so many things. Grief, even. I mean, we really need to lift the stigma and normalize all sorts of health issues as well. Also, I was reading about Osip Mandelstam this morning, who was a Russian Soviet poet who they're considered a poet martyr. I mean, he challenged people to rise up against Stalin, and he knew what the fate would be. He ended up dying in a gulag. But it's just maybe I don't want to challenge my audience that much. Maybe someday. But I think that's the responsibility of poets, is to become the voice of change. So that's and having feedback from your audience, whether it's having people come up to you after reading and saying, oh, and kind of almost whispering, this is in my family too.
Right.
But having them be not afraid to say that, or in Mandelstam's case, having people rise up against Stalin. I mean, that's what you really want to have happen with your work.
I've had so many poems make me feel more brave about expressing things myself, or about even just admitting things to myself. And I think it is so wonderful that, now that, I'm writing and publishing and sharing my work, that I get to be in that position too. Even things that at first maybe were a challenge to me or were hard for me to understand, as I've sort of grown as a person, over the course of my life, or, read, like you were saying, these different things and saying, you know what, I really think it's important for us to bring this into the narrative and to think about this too, and to take it seriously and look at something a really different way. I think as I've done that, then I get to step into that role of, I've challenged myself, and then this poem can be a challenge to you. And I think by, having a, warm, inviting environment and just welcoming people to hear our work, whether it is really kind of bright and pleasant or some kind of challenging ideas, is really powerful, because then that can add power to a social justice movement, that can add power to a lesser understood, side of the story. Like even when we're talking about the Garden of Eden, or something that's not heard as much, and I think that can make a really big difference. So I think that's so important. I think it's okay to be challenging and actually really important.
And I'm just, again, very aware of where we are right now in a public library. I want to state the obvious, that for all that we can question about what goes on in our country and our world, we live in a place where we can have these conversations and then go safely to our cars.
Yep.
And go home and not worry about being a dissident who might be jailed or fall out a window or
In
have something
Connecticut, at
happen.
least.
Fair point, David.
For now, yeah.
Sorry, Sandy.
And I think in continuing to do that and keeping those conversations alive, as the Poetry Society has through the pandemic and into the present with the online open mics and the Poets on Poetry that are free and open to the world. All you have to do is go to the website, sign up, and get on that Zoom. And Katie with Foomfa Live, and all these things are very findable in the program, and the program is also available on the library website to get you to the people who do these things. Barb, you've got Poetry at the Four Corners, Zoom, and you want to speak to some of your many Zoom things?
Like through the Ridgefield Library, which has become a real epicenter of poetry, which is wonderful. We offer a monthly online reading featuring 5 poets from Connecticut, the Four Corners in the Center region. It's called Poems from Connecticut's Four Corners. We've been going since January. We're going to take a little break in the summer, but it's going to be continuing in the fall. And it's just great. We get about between 40 and 60 people online for each reading, which is wonderful. So we really have a wonderful reach with that. And it features both well-known poets and, up-and-coming, emerging poets. So.
Are they recorded and left on Zoom or on the library?
No, the library has a YouTube channel that we post them to.
Okay.
And then we also had, just recently, we had the college students who were part of the Connecticut Poetry Circuit. The 5 winners, collegiate poet winners this year, did a reading. And we have also monthly just like generative workshops and things like that. So your public library is a great resource for the library. For poetry.
So I just wanted to kind of pause and make that commercial break for the public libraries. The Zooms that are available, and to be, and you can go to the Zoom and be a guest without reading. You can just listen. It's really great. I love them, and I think, and they're available, and the energy is available. YouTube, right? You can get on there and hear these people reading their poems and re-enter those conversations, and it's very, very exciting, and people from all walks of life and points of view are welcome there. That is the democratic conversation. Just to kind of bring this panel full circle, I would like to ask each of you to give some thought to the question, what is the most satisfying experience you've ever had with someone who's read your poetry? And create the opportunity, if you would maybe read a poem that has gotten a great reaction, just to kind of put your poetic voice in the conversation, whenever you're ready.
I have a great story. My book of poetry is out there, so I'll just share my story. No, well, that's okay. I'll just pass it down the line. But this story is so good. So my chapbook came out in late 2019, and I had a bunch of friends and family who bought it. But there were actually a few people I didn't know who bought it, which was so exciting. From Finishing Line Press, maybe I had met this one person once at an open mic, and he started to follow me, which was very cool. The next time I was back at that same open mic night, he came up to me and said, "I have a story for you about your book." I was like, "Okay, I'm ready for it." And he said, I read and I just loved your chapbook, and I brought it in to my work, and I kept it with my lunch stuff, on a table so that I could read it. And already I'm just like, this means so much to me. And, so it was there on the table, and so one of his coworkers came in, a lady, and saw the book, was like, "Oh, cool, I'll flip through this." She really loved it. And then what they did from day to day is they had a little conversation through my book of poems.
Oh, that's great.
I know. So they would like dog ear a different page for each other to read each day that sort of like represented what was going on with them. And he just said that the book meant a lot to him. This connection with this friend at work meant a lot to them, and that was really, really special. And so that was one of the most amazing, definitely the most amazing, like, kind of audience connection I've ever had. But I really appreciate, anytime I get to be heard and people appreciate my work. But yes, please follow me on social media, and I will cede the rest of my time to the poets who have their books ready to go.
That's so cool, passing the book back and forth.
I know, isn't that special? Oh, I'll never forget that. That meant so much to me. You never know where it's going out there. And then, of course, my dear family and friends who told me everything that they really enjoyed about my work. I have new poems that are a little bit bolder, a little bit more about social justice and about certain issues that are really important to me. Some that are a little bit more of a performance style poem, and I've gotten such powerful reactions that they're like, "Oh my God, can I buy that yet?" I'm like, "Not yet." But I'm excited that manuscript is a finalist for the Fairfield Book Prize. So I'm hoping that can be in people's hands soon. But yeah, it's really special to be able to connect with an audience like that.
Thanks, Katie.
Thank you.
I'll jump in if that's okay.
Go for it.
This is an Ars Poetica, which, as you probably know, is a poem written about about poetry, about you as a poet, anyway. So it's called Why I Write Poems. When older sisters had been dispatched to school and slate dull hours yawned before us, when she had tossed seed to the birds and pulled sheets tight on every bed, when washed plates were clatter-stowed in high cupboards and a laundry load twist-tangled in the enamel tub, when the steam iron ceased its angry hiss over starched white shirts and crisp school skirts, when I had sat on my hands in that silent seat, watching and waiting, waiting and watching, no word exchanged between us, no touch, no gaze, she would sink-sigh onto her hard chair, drag a ragged sleeve across the morning sweat, tap a sleek white cylinder from the red pack that awaited her on the table, put it to her lips, strike a match, and breathe relief. I knew not to interrupt these moments of ease, but when her eyes at last lifted from linoleum and recognized the waiting world, I'd venture, "Mama, I wrote you a poem," remembering always her joy, sudden and seldom, when a sister's poem was printed in the mimeographed PTA newsletter, sent home in a book bag that smelled of ink and envy. And she'd say, "Bring it here then, let's have a look." I'd hand her the scrap of paper covered every inch with electric scribbles, pre-literate lightning, desperate to speak at last, to mean. Then I'd sit in her lap and say, "You read it, Mama." And she would.
this speaks to audience again. I have a soft spot in my heart for veterans, and I write a lot of war poems and poems for and about veterans. So inevitably, I'll have a veteran come up to me and talk about, the poem and other things that they probably don't often talk about. So this one is titled Aubergine, and it is aubergine it means eggplant, and it's indigenous to India, Burma, China, and Vietnam.
Could I ask you to speak up a little bit,
Yes,
please?
sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so aubergine. I peel the thick outer layer of aubergine skin, tough as your exterior, dark as dried blood. I often cut myself while trying to expose the soft flesh beneath the surface. Eggplant. In medieval times, it came with warnings. Dark fruit, aphrodisiac to some. Today there is silence. 20 years since you came back from Nam. At home, the fields are wet as blood-soaked rice paddies. After the rain, I watch you slog the slippery ground, planting crops your first day home, since you dried out in rehab again. Group therapy fails to break your hardened skin. Instead, you keep your secrets, bury your anger like seeds sunk too deep within the earth. You dig the fields like trenches that protected you from Viet Cong, try to hide your wounds. I fix dinner, slice through layers of eggplant, salt and rinse, still the pungent seeds locked inside, while I savor soft, succulent meat. You taste only bitterness, and we both bleed.
I'll flip before.
Okay, well, when we're talking about something that happened with an audience person, my first book, Some of the Sunflower, is about coming of age through divorce, and I wrote it as my 15-year marriage ended, and so it was a big pivotal time in my life, and it went out into the world, and I never expected to get emails from women saying that it helped them. And even now, all these years later, it kind of makes me tear up. And that's the first time I realized that maybe my poetry could be helpful. That it could have, it could have a purpose outside of just being my poetry. And I think about that a lot. There was also one other cute little story. I had a couple of poems in this book for my children, and one of it is Thomas and the Full Moon. And one of my classmates from my MFA program read that at her son's school. There was a little boy there named Thomas, and he thought that poem was just for him. And I thought, and she said he was quite insistent, and so she said, yes, it's for you. And so all of these years later, my Thomas is now 26, and I wonder sometimes where this other little Thomas is, what he might be doing. I might have to write a poem for him now that we're talking. In the vein of reading a poem that kind of introduces myself, I thought I would read the title poem for my first book. It's a very simple poem, because I don't think I'm a very complicated person. But the title of the poem is Psalm of the Sunflower. I am the sunflower who follows the sun always, hoping, hoping, dark face uncovered, petals peeled back, eager, balanced on a flexible stem, expecting all I need is in the light, expecting always to follow the light.
What is the exact question?
To describe the most satisfying experience you've ever had with
Okay.
someone who's read your poetry, or read the poem.
Okay, I think it's a tie between today, April 11th here also, and Katie. Katie's Zoom. When I got a great reaction out of a poem that
I
I,
became the People's Poet of
People's-
Harlingen.
the People's Poet Laureate. Anyway,
I'm honored.
I read a poem on that occasion that, I don't know, people seem to like. So,
Well, let's hear it, Jack.
Yeah.
I will introduce it by saying my father in 1959 answered a classified ad and drove across the country in a car from one dealership to another. And it was right before Christmas, and I wondered, why is he doing it now? He was 13 years old. And we were wondering why he's risking not sharing Christmas with us. And so 62 years later, I did the same thing, just to see what it was like, just to see what the city by city that Dad drove through. And it was on December 15th that you did your Zoom, so that's why I named this December 15th, 1959.
I love it.
Today you crossed the Chattahoochee River, and 10 days later Christmas will arrive. But now you are 1,000 miles from home, while I sit here and sigh for black-haired Kathy, my 8th grade heartthrob at St. Mary's School, hoping for her name in the Secret Santa, and wondering if Christmas will be sad, my father gone and leaving me to pine for a pretty girl I know I'll never win, a girl who sits just 14 feet away, but farther from me than the 14th Street Bridge in Alabama, where you turn your Timex back, entering a new time zone in Phoenix City. And I wish I were taken to a time when I can understand why you left home, why you would leave your family to drive into the bayous of Louisiana, across the father waters of Baton Rouge, through torrential rain in Lone Star, Texas, and deserts where mist-shrouded sawtooth mountains never get closer, though you're speeding toward them. All the while falling thousands of miles behind, and Christmas now is just 5 days away. And yes, I do draw dark-eyed Kathy's name, but Kathy transfers to another school.
Oh no.
And now I have this heart-shaped tin of candies I have to give to a boy with a runny nose. Gives me notebook paper I don't need. And you're not here to touch me on the shoulder and tell me there are many other girls, and many months and years for me to meet them. As if your saying so would comfort me. As if indeed that even is the point, because you're driving that cream Thunderbird to a high-end dealership in East LA, then hopping on a plane to fly back home, dragging those Samsonites into our kitchen at midnight, shouting, "Here I am, I'm home." And now I feel like Santa Claus is here, and you have stories of your loneliness and how you wished you'd taken one of us to watch you steal a cotton ball in Georgia. But no, I stayed here with my broken heart, wondering why you did what you just did, until I do it, 62 years later, city by city, retracing your tire tracks, through rainstorms in the streets of downtown Philly, eating biscuits and gravy in New Orleans, taking selfies at the Alamo, driving through fog from Bakersfield to Hanford, and smiling when I think of your return on Christmas Eve to watch us hang our stockings. How Christmas 1959 was happy, because I never thought that it would come.